There are many other differences, but consider the resemblances. Ideologies have distinctive rituals. Islamists shout Allahu Akbar and death to America. The woke shout Black Lives Matter and I can't breathe.
All lives matter. It's okay to be white. The Pledge of Allegiance, saluting, is a ritual that conservatives really care about. This is true of all ideologies.
Islamists pray to Mecca. The woke take the knee. There were many American heroes on 9/11, but the greatest were the passengers and crew of Flight 93. Not only did they avert...
Don't want to be nitpicky, but I don't know about if we should be ranking the people who died on 9/11, you know? Like from who's the greatest in the hero and the most lowly hero, right? Like, oh, somebody who just let them into their shop to dodge debris, they're probably a level 1 hero. The firefighters who rushed into the burning buildings, they're a level 8 hero. The ones who diverted the flight, like level 10. I don't know if I'm gonna rank them or why these people are more heroic than the people who rushed into the burning buildings as firefighters and died saving lives. I don't know if ranking them's a really good idea, but okay.
That's what Al-Qaeda planned, a direct hit on the White House. But they also embodied Patrick Henry's credo, give me liberty or give me death. Do those words still have a meaning in America today? For 2 decades, I've spoken out against those strands of Islam that gave rise to Al-Qaeda. In this fight for freedom, I have faced many death threats. Yet, I have always consoled myself that in the US, freedom of conscience and expression were paramount values. It was partly for this reason that I moved here and became a citizen in 2013. It never occurred to me that free speech would come under threat in my newly adopted country. In 2014, I was invited to receive an honorary degree at Brandeis University and then ungraciously disinvited. Even when I first...
Wait, can I just say, if the argument they're about to go through is the anti-free speech argument, right? And I don't want to preempt it. I want to listen to this person. I want to hear what their argument is. But if the argument's going to be, well, the left in America hates free speech and the right in America loves free speech, therefore, they're most like these radical extremists overseas, which hates free speech as well. Donald Trump publicly, multiple times, called for flag burning to be banned. And flag burning is probably one of the most... People talk about like social media as that's one of the paramount issues of freedom of speech in the modern era. Flag burning for decades has been the central issue of debate when it comes to freedom of speech, right? While this Twitter stuff and the social media and concepts of like, well, government restriction on speech and, well, this isn't technically government restriction on speech, these are companies banning people, that's a more modern debate. The flag burning question is one of the oldest and easiest ways to tell if somebody has a real dedication to freedom of speech. Because a lot of people, me included, hate the sight of an American flag being burned because the American flag has a lot of symbolism for a lot of people. I'm not saying everybody has to feel the same way about symbols as I do, but a lot of people care deeply about that symbol, either due to the fact that they've had people serve in the United States military, or they had certain views about the United States. And that is why those individuals who burn the American flag have always been at the center of the free speech debate in the United States. Specifically, the question on whether flag burning should be banned. And it was decided, even by people like Antonin Scalia, that flag burning is constitutionally protected speech. Now, if we think about the presidents who went against flag burning, let's go last 3 administrations. Obama was not against flag burning. While he personally may have disliked it, he was not for banning it. Biden, he hasn't called for a ban on flag burning. He also understands, even if he doesn't like it personally, definitely as somebody who had a son, Beau, who served in the United States military, even if he doesn't like it on a personal level. Trump publicly called for a ban on flag burning. The number one issue and like boilerplate issue when it comes to the free speech debate in the United States, because that is something that people have suggested constitutional amendments to ban. We still have Republicans in Congress proposing flag burning. So it's not just Trump saying it. It's also Republicans in Congress, not just, oh, I'm calling for a ban on it, but putting out legislation to ban it. Republican proposes flag burning ban, and people are signing on to it. Look, and it's not just some random congressperson, it's a senator. GOP senator introduces constitutional amendment to ban flag burning. The American flag is a symbol of liberty and a beacon of hope. It represents the ideals that our nation was built upon for decades. Brave men and women have carried it, yada, 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 yada. Right? Going into it, this is why we should ban this instance of free speech. Again, it's not just him. If I go to YouTube, ignore my wrestling stuff, and I look up Donald Trump flag burning. Trump, burning the flag should be illegal. Trump flag burning tweet. Not just the tweet, but him publicly saying it during speeches. The fallout over Trump's reaction to flag burning. Trump says flag burning should result in jail and loss of citizenship, despite First Amendment. So if the argument that's about to be made to me is a free speech centered argument, you can talk about people trying to get others banned off of Twitter, but that is the government stepping in. I'm going to throw you in jail for burning a flag, which is a little bit more serious in my opinion than Twitter bans. Definitely, since that is the government itself, not a company stepping in, stopping that.
Encountered what has come to be known as cancel culture, I didn't fret too much. I was inclined to dismiss the alliance of campus leftists and Islamists as a lunatic fringe.
As a lunatic fringe. The thing is, the ideology of leftists in the United States and Islamists is very different. Whether it comes to issues like homosexuality, trans issues, any of these issues, we can go when it goes to social issues. They're very, very different. So again, there is no alliance of leftists and Islamists. That isn't a thing.
They are not the fringe anymore. Many on the left, academia, the media, and now even the corporate world have inculcated in a generation of students an ideology that has much more in common with the intolerant doctrines of a religious cult than with the secular political thought I studied at Holland's Leiden University.
Donald Trump literally just went to like the Moonies conference and made a speech. He just did this. He just did this. He did it. He just did this. Trump gives the virtual speech to an event linked to controversial religion cult on 9/11 anniversary. This is the cult that believes that their founder was a prophet sent by God that overlooked the beating of many wives in their mass marriage events, scheduled arranged marriage events. They had to shot off in the United States, where this leader of it believes that the AR-15 is a rod of iron talked about in the Bible and is a religious instrument to be used in religious ceremonies. The AR-15, the gun. That's not even to talk about Blacks for Trump, which is a separate cult which the Trump campaign consistently puts behind them as they have links on their shirts. And how their founder was, I believe, arrested or convicted of, was it like conspiracy to commit murder? And believed and he was part of the Nation of Islam at one point. Look, all I'm saying is if we're talking about cult behavior and links to cults, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's the route you want to go here.
In the debates after 9/11, many people sought materialist explanations for the attacks. The jihadis lacked educational and employment opportunities. They were angry at American foreign policy in the Middle East, and so on.
Well, yes, and you also inject religious extremism to that. If you look at the areas that have the most religious extremism, it is the areas where they lack educational and employment opportunities, and they have something to lash out at. And if America's not there, it's kind of hard to lash out at a force that is not even present in your community. I'm sure if the Russians were there militarily or present when it comes to their foreign policy, it'd be the Russians they were lashing out at. But yes, these are two factors that can create jihadists, yes.
I argued that none of these could explain the motivations of the plotters and hijackers all of whom in any case came from middle class and upper class homes. Their goal was religious and political.
Yes, if you specifically talk about the 9/11 hijackers, then it's going to be a different argument as to why they specifically were involved. But if you look at the vast majority of those who were part of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, it is not middle class and upper middle class fighters. In fact, in most militaries or any type of militia force, that's not going to be the case, period, anyway.
Denounce Arab governments as corrupt and their Western allies as infidels, and ultimately to overthrow the existing order in the Middle East and establish...
Like, could you imagine if I said poverty does not lead to crime, and the reason I gave is I pointed to a rich kid committing crime? Well, yes, rich people can also commit crime, and rich people can also commit crime that are typically done by lower income individuals. But if you provide a community with educational opportunities and job opportunities, the likelihood of them committing crime goes down drastically. The same is true for extremist organizations and religious extremism as well. If you provide more educational opportunities and you provide more job opportunities, then the temptation of joining a religious extremist group is going to seem a lot less tempting. That's not to say that they're not going to have any members. There are religious zealots of all incomes around the world, like those who spread extremely, who fund hardcore schools of thought of any religion internationally. Like there's a lot of extremely rich evangelicals, for example. But the majority of the people who join these organizations are lower income. Yes.
A caliphate. American policymakers preferred the materialist explanations as they implied actions to solve the problem: invasion, regime change, democratization. It was unpopular to suggest that the terrorists might have unshakable convictions having nothing to do with material considerations.
I actually don't know what she's talking about, because there's a lot of people who definitely when you're talking about 9/11, that were just like, that's just how they are, that's just how the Muslims are, just glass the Middle East. These really, really like hardcore, just to be completely honest with you, bigoted explanations of the Middle East that this is just how it is. The Muslims have always been barbaric, and they always will be barbaric. It's like this very like kind of dunderheaded, beating yourself in the head with a hammer take, right? But this is not the case, right? If you look at the history of Islam and its growth in the Middle East, relatively, there was many times in history, definitely in times of prosperity when it came to Islamic kingdoms, where, for example, Jews were better treated in Islamic kingdoms than, say, Christian ones, where you were seeing like the Spanish Inquisition, for example. Of course, there were other times where there were Christian areas that were better for Jews than it was for Muslim kingdoms. It depends on the time, the regime, which leadership was in power, and what interpretation of the faith was being spread around. It depends on a lot of different factors. But to just say that Muslims are violent because they're Muslims, and Muslims are extreme because they're and that's why the terrorists are like they are, is because Islam and end period, let's not talk about any other considerations, is ridiculous. Because you want to know something else? The Ku Klux Klan had a lot of big financial backers. This is an example of, I would say, a Christian extremist organization in the United States. I would even go as far to call them a terrorist organization for the tactics they used. Do you think the majority of the Klan's membership or the people who supported the Klan were the very wealthy governmental elites? There were governmental elites who supported the Klan, most certainly. There were wealthy people who supported the Klan financially in other ways, most certainly. But if you think about the Klan's base of support, the majority of it were people who were being taken advantage of. Low income, poor folk. Material conditions can push you in certain directions. It's not the end-all be-all factor. There has to be some ideologies that's been spread at some point. But trying to rob a materialist explanation at all from the situation is silly.
2 decades later, we see a similar dynamic, only this time it's within America's borders. Naive observers explain the Black Lives Matter protests and riots of 2020 in terms of blacks' material disadvantages. These are real, as are the far worse socioeconomic problems of the Arab world, but they hide the leaders' real motivations.
The leader's real motivation. Here we go.
Their ideology goes by many names. Social justice, critical race theory, and intersectionality are just a few.
These are... Okay. So these are all very different things with very different... Some of these things overlap, but they all have different explanations. But just throw the buzzwords out. Throw them out. We don't need to address each one. Just throw out all the buzzwords.
Simplicity, I call it all wokeism.
Okay. Just call it all wokeism. Call it all wokeism. Okay. So for me to acknowledge the reality of intersectionality is all the same thing as every single principle of CRT and all these other social justice, whatever. It's all wokeism. I'll just cover it with this blanket. And we can just talk about intersectionality for a second, since we're not going to have enough time to go into specifics, since the video doesn't want to get into specifics. But intersectionality is a very simple concept. That your different identities and your backgrounds and your experiences combined create a unique experience for you. That it is not just that I am a white person or that you are a black person, but that the different characteristics of your life combine to give you a unique experience. That these things are intersectional and overlap. For example, the life of a while it's not all defined by these characteristics, they do affect how you're treated generally by society. The life of a person who for example, is black and also, let's say they're disabled, let's say they lost their legs in war, fighting in Afghanistan, for example, is going to be different than the experience when we talk about how those characteristics treat you in society than a white person with perfectly functioning legs, right? Now you can say, well, that doesn't mean that the black person who's disabled isn't more successful or has it easier off. Of course it doesn't. But when it comes to things like walking, I think the guy with the functioning legs kind of got the other person beat when it comes to who's privileged in that situation. When it comes to the death penalty, the white person most certainly has the other person beat generally, statistically. If you are a black person, you're much more likely to be put on death row than a white person. And if the victim of a crime is white, you're more likely to be put on death row than if the victim of a crime is black. Quite literally, the valuation of black life less than white life in the criminal justice. That's just one thing in all of the wokeisms that they've all merged into one ball. Critical race theory wasn't enough of a merge into one ball hybrid boogeyman. Now we need to use wokeism as well. Okay.
I'm not about to equate wokeism and Islamism. Islamism is a militant strain of an ancient faith. Its believers have a coherent sense of what Allah wants them to achieve on earth to earn rewards in the afterlife. Wokeism is just another version of Marxism. It scorns religion and the idea of an afterlife.
Dude, they're just throwing out terms like candy. Wokeism is another version of Marxism, which scorns religion and the idea of the... Okay.
Wokeism divides society into myriad identities, whereas Islamist division is simpler, believers and unbelievers. There are many other differences.
Wait. I'm pretty sure most ideology divides people into groups, right? Marxism, actually, can somebody name me a single ideology that doesn't divide people into groups? I'm pretty sure all ideologies and all systems of government divide people into groups to at least some extent.
Division is simpler, believers and unbelievers. There are many other differences, but consider the resemblances.
Adherents of each
ideological purity, certain of their own rectitude.
This is true of all ideologies. All ideologies believe this. A great example would just be what happened to Liz Cheney in the Republican Party, where she would not pretend, like the rest of the Republican Party, that the election was stolen in 2020, and so, since she was not a pure enough follower of the cult of Donald J. Trump, she had to be ejected from her leadership position as the second most powerful House Republican. Purity testing happens in all organizations. Centrists complain, all organizations and all ideologies. Centrists complain about this all the time and how they're purity tested out of rooms. This isn't just true for Islamism or whatever the hell wokeism is.
Neither Islamists nor the woke will engage in debate.
Hell, I could just point at the Christian evangelical community or the Christian community in the United States that it depends on your views on homosexuality, views on this, views on that. You might not be a real Christian. Or, hell, what about rhinos, Republicans in name only? That is that phrase is pure, undistilled purity testing.
Both prefer indoctrination of the submissive and damnation of those who resist.
Neither will engage in debate. Both prefer indoctrination of the submissive and domination of those who resist. Okay. So there's this stereotype that like left-wingers don't like to debate. It depends on the person. I'm a left-winger. I debate. Vosh is a left-winger on the internet. He debates. Destiny is somebody who's a left-wing person in the United States. He debates. There's a lot of people on the internet. Dr. Heem Dow, Sharks Zero. All these people in our spaces debates. Hell, Joe Biden was the presidential nominee. He debates. Now, I think what they're talking about is maybe people that shout people down or stuff like that. They don't prefer debate. But there have been examples of right-wing organizations going to the speaking events of left-wingers and shouting them down and stopping them from making speeches. A great example was something I covered on this channel where Beto O'Rourke was giving a speech somewhere. He was talking about his political opinions. Right-wingers came in, shouted him down, and didn't want to allow him to speak because they didn't want to participate in the battle of ideas, the battle in the free market of ideas, or whatever the hell you want to call it, because he's the gun-grabbing Beto, so fuck him, he's going to take our religious liberties. It really depends on the individual. There is nothing and by the way, she's defining this as wokeism. This is a made-up thing. She just got 3 separate things, CRT, intersectional, and threw them all together and says, this thing that I just made up doesn't like debate. So I have to argue with a made-up thing that she just created. She's not talking even necessarily about left-wingers, but I'm just arguing with a vague concept she just made up in her head. No, Sam Cedar, that's a great example where Steven Crowder was dodging Sam Cedar forever to the point where Sam Cedar basically had to do like a drive-by debate. Yeah, exactly.
Ideologies have distinctive rituals. Islamists shout Allahu Akbar and death to America. The woke shout Black Lives Matter and I can't breathe.
All lives matter. It's okay to be white. The Pledge of Allegiance is a great example of a ritual that conservatives really care about. The religious rituals that conservatives participate in. Saluting is a ritual that conservatives really care about. There's a million different rituals that conservatives care a whole lot about. In fact, I see all the time people complaining about these kids these days aren't saying the Pledge of Allegiance and da-da-da-da-da. Those are rituals that conservatives care about. In fact, people who are traditionalists, which tend to be conservative, really do care about rituals. So I don't understand, like, distinctive rituals. Like, there's a lot of, like this is something you can apply to all ideologies. So the point of this video isn't to actually find the ideological similarities between Islamism or whatever the made-up thing wokeism is. It's to make the accusations or things that they're talking about, the similarities between these groups, so vague and so broad that it could literally, you could put anything in there. I could say the similarities between wokeism and Trumpism, and I say they both have distinctive rituals. That's true. They both are neither willing to engage in debate and both prefer indoctrination of the submissive and damnation of those who resist. Oh, well, I saw Steven Crowder dodge all those debates with Sam Cedar, and of course I saw all those lefties dodging debates, so there's another example. This is so vague, you could apply it to anything. This isn't actually trying to find a tie between these two ideologies. This is just fear-mongering.
Black Lives Matter and I can't breathe. Islamists pray to Mecca. The woke take the knee.
What the fuck does that even mean? Islamists pray to Mecca. Conservatives and religious people in the United States pray to Jesus. Conservatives salute. Conservatives put their hand over the flag for the United States.
Both like burning the American flag. Both take offense.
I've seen conservatives burn the Chinese flag. Hell, I remember when the Proud Boys came into DC, they were burning the symbols of Black Lives Matter. In fact, they stole the property of a local black church and then burnt it to show how much they hated Black Lives Matter. Burning symbols is nothing new. And look, the idea that wokeism, or I guess it's a made-up thing, so she's going to determine, well, wokeists are only the people who burn the American flag. But if you were to poll most Democrats don't support burning flags. And again, the thing is, what's funny is right here is actually a more interesting conversation we could have had about free speech and burning the American flag and the history of that debate, but instead it's just glossed right over.
Both take offense at every opportunity and demand not just apologies, but concessions.
Again, I can point this straight back at the Republican Party. Where, oh, Joe Biden said this, he needs to apologize to the United States of America. Oh, this person said this, for example, that one teacher who had their students, because they didn't have an American flag, they said the pledge to the pride flag they had in the classroom. And then you had the whole stampede of conservatives come out like, this teacher needs to apologize to the men and women of the United States military. Or all the conservatives that called on Colin Kaepernick to apologize to all the men and women of the United States military. So again, this is so vague, it can apply to any ideology on the planet. Yes, all ideologies call for people to apologize for bad things. Yes. And all ideologies, the people of all ideologies on the planet, take offense. Getting offended is a universal thing.
Islamism.
Did you know that people who follow Islamism drink water and people in wokeism drink water? Wow, amazing commentary here.
Inveighs against blasphemy. Wokeism wants to outlaw hate speech.
And Trump wants to ban flag burning. We can do this all day.
Islamists use the word Islamophobia to silence critics. The woke do the same with racism.
And the right does it with CRT. The right does it with, oh, Jesus Christ.
Both ideologies aim to tear down the existing system and replace it with utopias.
Oh, that's all critical race theory. Oh, that's unpatriotic. Oh, here's a great one. You don't support the troops. If you criticize any of America's foreign policy entanglements, you don't support the troops. Again, this is so vague, it covers fucking everything.
That always turn out to be hellish anarchies. Islamic.
Wait, wokeism. Both ideologies aim to tear down the existing system and replace it with utopias that always turn out to be hellish anarchies. Oh, sweet. So libertarians.
State in Raqqa, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle. Both are collectivist. Group identity trumps the individual.
Look, okay? All I have to do is just say the word nationalism. That's all I need to say. The nationalist right in the United States really cares about group identity. Just look at how they worship the flag. Just look at our group rituals when it comes to football games. And I'm not saying that these rituals are even bad, like singing the national anthem before a football game, like cool, whatever. But don't say that this isn't group identity.
Both tolerate and often glorify violence carried out by zealots.
What? Do I need to show footage or amount of statements made in support of running over protest? Okay, look. Okay, I think people get what I'm getting at. That this is so vague it could apply to literally anything.
The grievances of Islamists and the
And by the way, wokeism, because they're also getting the worst of each crowd. The majority of left-wingers, Democrats, whatever the hell you want to call them, do not support political violence. Just like the majority of Muslims don't support political violence. This is also something that is just talking about the extremists and either side, right? Just the extremists. And if I applied that standard to the right as well, I could talk about the people who support running over protesters.
Violence
or the Proud Boys. Or the 3%ers.
By zealots.
I could just point at January 6th as a great example of that.
The of Islamists and the woke aren't merely economic, and they won't be satisfied with jobs or entitlements or any other blandishments politicians are willing to offer.
The thing is with combating extremism, it isn't just doing one thing. It's a multi-pronged approach. You need to provide economic opportunities. You need to apply provide job opportunities. You need to have a functioning, decent economy so people have other options outside of going down extremist paths to explain why the world is so shit. And on the other side, you need to put out decent amount of content and material tearing down extremism, explaining why it's terrible, it's disgusting, it's bad. You need to argue against these ideas. You need to strike these groups where they surface. It's a multi-pronged approach. And I feel like what this person's doing, not only are they trying to fearmonger about the woke left as if they're like all gonna be the next ISIS, but they're also taking away one of the main tools that governments use to combat extremism, which is taking recruits away from extremists by providing other material options for them and giving them an education that would show them like, hey, you know what? Maybe stoning women isn't a good idea. Maybe beheading these people isn't a good idea. I read this book that actually says women pretty dope, actually.
Their motivations are ideological, and they'll be satisfied only with power. And
Man,
then
ideology. If only there was a thing that we could provide people that it could hopefully trump hateful ideologies. Like, I don't know, like education that would show them why these ideas are wrong. Man, we'll never figure it out.
they'll demand more power. I cling to the hope that most Americans are still willing to fight and, if necessary, to die to preserve our freedoms, our...
Maybe she's one of the... Okay. Be careful. We might have to die because somebody asked for a safe space on college campuses. Be ready. Before you know it, there'll be ISIS.
rights, our customs, our history.
Wait. Just talking about how they perform rituals, and then she talks about the need to defend customs, which are rituals.
Die to preserve our freedoms, our rights,
Dude.
our customs, our history.
How is
That
any of
was
this convincing? What I was expecting was something like, well, let's talk about this Islamist author who has ties to this SJJ. No, it wasn't any of that. It was basically to the extent of the ties that this person alleged. It was to the extent of like Hitler liked dogs, Joe Biden liked dogs, Joe Biden next Hitler. But somehow they stretched that out to 5 minutes and 43 seconds.
Spirit of Flight 93. We need to summon that spirit again. I'm Ayaan Hirsi Ali, Research Fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford for PragerU.
Stanford? Dude. You know, she might have disproven me. Because if this person works at Stanford, then this is actually a great example of how education maybe does not work in all instances.
University. Thank you for watching.
Terrible. Jesus Christ.